let's get started. So, okay, I'm going to share my screen. And so I will be sharing this with you guys. What I thought is maybe at the end, everyone can pop their email in the chat. And then I can copy those and then send the things I'm sharing with everyone. So essentially, this is kind of my notes that I kind of curated for this. I wanted to go through like a couple, I guess our main topics that I kind of told Amelia I was going to bring up were how to find stories, how to tell stories, how to ask for consent or deal with vulnerable populations, and then maybe some best practices to actually making reels that I found. So I will talk a little bit more than what's on here, but this was kind of like the resource guide that I'm kind of going off of with all the links to everything that I'm sharing so that you can indefinitely have it as well.
Hey, Nadia, I just want to interrupt for 2 seconds and just say that I do have to leave in about 10 minutes, but I'm going to pop my email in the chat right away. Okay.
Yes. Awesome. That sounds good.
Thanks.
Thanks. Um, okay, so this is a screenshot that's on my wall in my room. And this was from like one of the first little training things that I did with CBC when I first joined them. And I just think like it is the best thing. Like there's a reason why it's a screenshot of a screenshot on the wall in my room. And I think it just, I don't know. I've never seen anything better. There's no video, no article, no anything that just is better than this one little blurb, which is observation, documents, interviews. Ideas are everywhere. Wonder about the world. Question everything. Talk to people, listen to them, ask them questions, watch them. I know it sounds a bit creepy, but go to events, read classified ads, notice changes in the neighborhood, find out what people are up to, follow the news, read, listen, watch. Um, Scrap the CBC coverage part that doesn't have to be in there. Engage in social media. And I think that it's really like um, to have the, I guess, tenacity of it, like being in this space, it really just comes down to curiosity. I think that like inherently we just have to be curious, not nosy, but curious in the sense of my favorite word, sorry, is challenge. Like challenging everything. I think my parents would definitely agree that I did this a lot growing up. I would always ask why. Like it's a common reoccurring theme, but anytime somebody's doing something or I see something, I'm asking myself, well, why are we doing it that way? And it makes me a little bit of a difficult person in school group projects because oftentimes I'm like, so why are we doing it this way when I know there's an easier, better way? But I digress. But ultimately, being so naturally curious and inquisitive and also having that and not, I guess, being afraid to have those questions or those curiosities, which is a bit of a responsibility because obviously we don't want to ask questions or be creepy, when we're approaching things we're curious about. But I think ultimately what discerns people from that, like from being creepy versus being approachable in those questions, is knowing who you're asking, and doing a little bit of research or digging, and thinking about the person or the source that you're going to ask your questions, or the person that you are observing, is important. And that's exactly why in this we're going to be talking about consent as well, right? So asking people for that consent to ask those questions and wonder about them and wonder about their life and wonder why they came.
Come on.
Oh, it's just Amani. Your mic is on. But my favorite one in this list, to get stories, is just talking to people. I think like like that is where I get most inspired by things, because I get to hear people that are actually doing the thing that they're doing and listen to something that I'm like, oh, I definitely would have never had that thought or that idea if I hadn't listened to what you're saying, if I hadn't listened to someone who's in it, who's doing that. There's only so many questions I can ask as I'm observing someone, but once they're telling me some experience or some story, I get inspired and I get inquisitive and I get curious. So have curiosity, know the source that you're going to answer those curiosities, and do a little bit of investigation. Maybe it's even just as simple as checking out their Facebook and seeing kind of like what they're posting and where they work and things like that. I know that does sound a little bit creepy, but it's public information. You get what I'm saying? Just doing a little bit of consideration. Maybe they're on a website for some organization and you want to read their bio to see kind of what their background is. And like, these are things that as a journalist I have to do. Because of course I want to be considerate of people and their time. And I want to ask questions to people that are receptive of those curiosities. Okay, so I wanted to share, so this is the first video I really want to share with you guys, which is this Think Like a Journalist one is a phenomenal video. It is a bit longer, but I'm still left resources in here that we might not get through together. But I do want to watch this video together, which is how to find unreported stories. I find that a lot of times vulnerable stories are underreported stories because of the time and the challenge that it takes to tell the stories. So we're going to watch this quick video together. And I'm going to share this screen.
If you're a web designer, here.
One second. Can you see that? Okay, perfect. I'm just going to extend this.
4 Wix Studio features you gotta know. So first on the list.
My name is Marina Walker Guevara.
And I'm Natalie Applewhite.
We are part of the editorial team at the Pulitzer Center, which means that we help journalists and news outlets tell stories that aren't getting enough attention in the media. We call these underreported stories.
These are stories that don't only look at what is happening in the world, but also about why things are happening. They look at the roots of the big issues our world faces, to examine the root causes, the human impacts, and the possible solutions. Today, we're going to explore a few ways that you can find underreported stories that interest you. It always starts with getting curious.
One way to start finding underreported stories is to think critically about what we see in the media. When you look at the front page of a newspaper, or at the home page of a news site, or when you watch a news show in television, you can ask yourself, what is happening and why? Who is affected and why? Who might be affected and is not represented in the stories? And finally, what do these issues look like in my community? Let's look at how a few journalists use questions like this to find underreported stories about the coronavirus pandemic. Public health researchers had warned for decades of the dangers of a global pandemic. Now, as COVID-19 spreads across the globe, Pulitzer Center and its grantees are asking, why were these warnings ignored? They are also asking, who is getting access to necessary medical equipment and medical treatment, and who isn't? And what is the impact of the crisis on the most vulnerable, including communities of color, undocumented immigrants, and students? They ask why these communities are the most impacted and what can be done to help.
Another way that you can identify underreported stories is by talking to people about the issues that matter to them. Choose someone in your life or in your community and ask them questions like, what issues are important to you and why? Or what issues are impacting the people you care about and how? Let's look at an example. Daniela Zaltzman traveled to Canada in 2014 to investigate why the rate of HIV infections was rising, specifically amongst Indigenous communities in Canada. After listening really closely to dozens of people speak about the issues that mattered to them, she learned that many Indigenous Canadians were continuing to navigate the lasting impact of Canada's Indian residential schools. That legacy helped explain the root causes of the HIV crisis and many other crises in these particular communities.
The work that I've done so far largely focuses on the school system in Canada, which ran from 1870 until 1996. And it was a network of boarding schools where young Native children would be forcibly taken from their homes and sent sometimes hundreds of miles away, where they would be told that they could not speak their own languages, they could not practice their culture, and they had to assimilate into Western Canadian culture.
Daniela collaborated with survivors of this system to create double exposure portraits that document their experiences. By continuing to ask how this happened and why, she has gone on to investigate the lasting impacts of similar Indian residential school systems in the United States, Australia, and New Zealand.
Often your immediate surroundings can also be inspiration for underreported stories. Where are you now? What do you see? Who do you see? Now you can ask yourself, what doesn't make sense to you? What do you see that seems unfair or confusing? And what do you want to know more about? When photojournalist Sim Chi-yin was living in Beijing, a city of more than 21 million people, she became curious about the city's migrant workers, an estimated 1 million people. These chefs, karaoke hostesses, security guards, domestic workers are the backbone of Beijing's service industry. Yet due to the high cost of living in Beijing, many of these migrants had to live in basements beneath the city's skyscrapers and streets. Because of this, they were unkindly dubbed the Rat Tribe by Chinese media.
I've explained to them that because they've been dubbed the Rat Tribe, I want to make portraits of them to show people how normal they are, how they look like any other young, hip Chinese person who lives above ground. The only difference is that they can't afford to live above ground, and so for the time being they live below ground.
How can you find underreported stories that are important to you? Try exploring the news, talking to the people around you about the issues that matter to them, and getting curious about the places and the people around you.
Ask yourself, what issues aren't getting attention? Who's affected by those issues? How? Why? And is there anybody trying to help?
Dive into your curiosity. Notice what underreported stories interest you. And as you do, you'll start becoming more aware of the deeper issues facing our society and the potential solutions.
You will become a smarter, more empathetic citizen who is better able to make informed decisions and important contributions to society.
Okay. I love that video. I think that it just kind of goes through that added layer of stories that we might encounter that I think would fall under vulnerable stories because of their nature in being either misreported, I think kind of falls right under being underreported is just like hearing stories that you feel like is like, did you ask the right questions? Like, did you go as far as you could have gone to find the right voices? So that's just a little gem of a video. The next thing I want to go through is, I guess, like how to tell the stories. So, again, I do have a couple kind of videos here. I think one is about finding and managing sources. So I think that kind of goes back to what I was touching about just like having the right people to answer those questions. So if that's something that you think might be important to you to learn a bit more, I do have an extra video about that. As well as if you are the one interviewing in the video, I have a video for that as well. All these videos have been videos I've watched like over the past 3 years. So these are like, I would say like the best videos I found. Anytime I watch a video, I'm like that person that will like search and click through like a bajillion YouTube videos to find one that I'm like, I'm actually gonna sit through and listen through this. So yeah, if you are genuinely curious, I think these are some of like the best picks. Not to pat myself too much on the back, but they are pretty good. But the one I do really want to share with everyone is the 5 storytelling tips. So how do we actually like tell a story? Now that we have the idea, we find a source or sources, how do we tell the story? And this is such a great video. So I'm going to share this one.
Hey, it's Riaz Megji, founder of the...
I would say before I share this video, I always find that like really honestly, I would say almost any medium, I find that with storytelling, it's kind of like how we learned it in maybe like a first English class. Like there has to be a beginning, a middle, an end. And most times it starts with a problem. And I like starting with a problem because it sometimes can be a little controversial, which is for online, can be a little bit good. Sometimes you want a little bit of traction. You want a little bit, sometimes keyboard warriors aren't the worst thing because they propel your video. But obviously you don't want really, really nasty comments. There's a balance. But having some kind of problem and just presenting it. And then slowly as we go through, just like a novel, just like you're reading a novel, there's some problem, there's some issue. Maybe it's Julia likes Marco, but Marco likes Cynthia. And then slowly we go through the story and there's some kind of rising action. And then we get to like the main conflict where Julia kills the other girl because she's so jealous or something. Like some crazy thing happens. And then there's like kind of the falling action and or some kind of resolution. So we know the solution. I think a lot of people, when we watch things or we engage with stories, we like to know how it ends, like how it gets all solved and figured out. So it's kind of like a blueprint. It doesn't work for every story. There's so many stories that don't have a solution or an answer. But kind of just like thinking about a story that's like, a little bit, just to bring viewers or your audience a little bit through the story. And that's kind of like a general rule as a whole, like in business or things when we're conveying things, to start with something that people have to think about, that jars them a little bit, to sit and think, okay, well, what is the problem here? What is going on? And that's usually a really good starting place as a journalist. So anyway, I'm going to share my screen again. Oh, I don't know. I did not select the, 1 second.
Every Conversation Counts platform and 17-year television broadcaster, this is the channel that helps you build extraordinary relationships, ask the questions that create breakthrough moments, and become a captivating storyteller that connects on every stage. Now, how many times have you caught yourself telling what you believe to be the greatest story ever, only to realize that your audience tuned you out 10 minutes earlier? Awkward. Storytelling is one of the most important skills for leading a successful life. You can teach a lesson, inspire commitment, and even ace that job interview for your dream gig. Our storytelling ability is the difference between simply communicating and establishing powerful human connection. In any speech, presentation, or pivotal conversation, if you want to capture your audience's attention, start with story. I would see this all the time interviewing experts, leaders, athletes, and celebrities. The big challenge though, how can you successfully reveal a part of yourself and draw people closer to you at the exact same time? Well, follow these 5 ideas. Before you even begin, ask yourself, what is the purpose of your story? Is it to inform, persuade, enlighten, maybe even entertain? Every good story starts with framing a problem that needs solving. And consider this, what does your audience care about right now? Clarify your purpose with a narrative that speaks to their priorities. And when you're doing this, keep in mind, emotion is everything. In memorable interviews, I consistently see that the most impactful stories were not only fueled by emotion, but they also had 4 key ingredients: hope, help, heart, and humor. John Maxwell outlines these 4 in one of my favorite books of all time, Everyone Communicates, Few Connect. If you can deliver on one of these, you'll make an impression. If you deliver on all 4, your audience will never forget you. Number 2, great stories tell the truth in interesting ways. Opening with an unexpected truth or a secret is a great hook off the top, as it creates a sense of intrigue for your audience. Secrets provide motivation and plot twists that may need to be protected or defended. And let's be honest, everybody is captivated by a powerful personal reveal. It's important to read the room though and make sure your audience is ready to receive this degree of personal information. As a bonus tip, it's also beneficial to choose a secret with a silver lining, because it sets up a change or transformation. Now, if I were to say and start my story by saying, last month, I received an email I was never supposed to see. Chances are you're going to start wondering, well, what did it say? And are you okay? Begin with the truth or best secret from your story, and you will have your audience asking the most important question: what happened next? Number 3, speak to their senses. Our brains absorb stories as if we are experiencing them ourselves. And an effective way to tap into this idea is, speak to the audience's senses. When you walked into the room, what did you see, hear, smell, touch, taste? You want the audience to experience your words, and these details draw them right into the scene with you. The more detail you can give, the more invested they will become in your plot. Number 4, share your transformation. The best stories deliver a transformational truth. You've probably heard of the story structure to have a beginning, middle, and end, which is essentially a hook, development, and climax. This is a valuable baseline to start with, yet if you want to capture and keep their attention, consider following this framework: struggle, conflict, and then resolution. Struggle. If people are going to cheer for your success, they need to relate to your struggle first. So tell them, what did your life look like when you were losing? The realer you can be here, the better. When you couldn't pay your bills, when your relationship fell apart, or when you lost your job. Everyone loves to root for an underdog, so describe that range of emotion you experienced behind the struggle and then draw them in. The conflict. What was the roadblock you encountered? And really dive into the challenge you were up against. This is your chance to build suspense and set up a cliffhanger. Was it physical conflict, an emotional dilemma? Tell them what was at stake. And then finally, resolution. Until now, your buildup may have created mystery and unpredictability. Your resolution or moment of transformation, that's the big reveal. Maybe you saved a life, saved your company, or reconciled with a loved one. Describe the moment where you overcame adversity and explain how this changed you. The key to this point is delivering a tangible takeaway, as the entire time your audience will be asking, what's in it for them? And your job is to articulate the lesson learned and give them the meaning behind it. Final point, getting personal with your storytelling can be an effective way to connect with someone. But consider this, convey credibility before vulnerability. If you're going to present something raw and personal, you need to make sure you've proven your worth first. In psychology, there's a concept known as the pratfall effect. This is important because how your audience responds to your openness really depends on how they perceive you beforehand. So if you have conveyed credibility and strength and then show your vulnerability, you will draw people closer. However, on the flip side, if people are already questioning your competence, well, your personal reveal might actually fall flat and they may just perceive you as a big, hot mess. Earn their respect before anything else, and your storytelling skills will help you to connect with everyone you meet. Now it's your turn. In the comment section below, share your best storytelling tip. Would love to learn how you captivate.
Yeah, that's another gem video. This guy's great. He's really articulate and sharing everything. One thing that I want to add for those who use social media, especially maybe in your work or what you're doing. This is more of a marketing thing, but I think that a lot of the most successful pieces on social media boil down to two kind of keywords. One is aspirations, and the other is pain points. So there was a story that recently kind of like went super viral that CTV did. And it was about this student who lives in Alberta but flies to his classes. I don't know if you saw it, but he flies to his classes. He attends UBC, and he just, every time his classes, he just hops on a plane and flies to his classes like twice a week, I think. And it's cheaper for him than living there and paying rent there. It's cheaper, and it was just such a wild story. But again, it hits a pain. It definitely hits a pain point for people watching, and also an aspiration being everyone wants to save money, and that's a wild, crazy way to save money. And secondly, pain point, which is, oh my God, this is the level of hoops we have to jump through to save that money in the first place, like literally taking a whole flight to class. Like it was wild, and it took off. I think it's one of the biggest news stories of this month that isn't, politically charged. It was just such a crazy story. But again, it kind of alludes to those like aspiration pain points, and having both or one of them can help propel storytelling, or even just a normal piece of content that isn't necessarily journalistic. So it's kind of a little bit of a marketing tidbit. So how to find stories, how to tell stories. Let's dive into kind of the main little bulk of this kind of session. Also, I guess I should have probably said this at the beginning, but this session was an hour and a half. So we're going to go until about 5:30, and then at 5:30, I'll kind of open and yield the floor if people just have questions that you guys want to ask me. But yeah, so we're going to go for about 20 more minutes here. I'm just going to share this screen again. So this was the best article that I saw this a while ago that I was wondering about this, just because I'm an independent journalist, so I kind of have to use outside resources other than my own judgment sometimes. So this was a LinkedIn article out of anything, but I really liked how it broke down consent. So they talked about these 4 words: autonomy, competence, information, and voluntariness. And so essentially, it's just that everyone has the right to offer consent. Like if you're putting them on a video or audio in media, obviously they have their own right. They have to be able to communicate that they have that right and that they understand that they can say yes or no. So obviously, hearing it from them that they want to be engaged in, whether it's a video or audio or just a written story. And then information, that the way that you're conveying the consent is very clear. So oftentimes that could involve like actually sharing who you are. Like if I'm talking to someone, I always preface like, hey, I'm an independent journalist. My content goes on TikTok and Instagram and Facebook. So it's an online platform. I typically record via video. So this is a video recording. and it won't go anywhere else. So I always communicate like who I am, and especially like where the information or medium is going. I think that's always like a second half. That's so important. Because of course, like especially with social media, and when I tell the stories I do, for example, I did this story last May about Red Dress Day. It was like May 5th. And or maybe it's not Red Dress Day. Maybe that's Red Dress Day. Either Red Dress Day / National Awareness Day for MMIWG. And it was with Sakani, and she was a two-spirited Indigenous person, and yeah, it took off, and some of the comments were very supportive, but of course, in our world, the two-spirited issue can be deemed as controversial online, and definitely incited people to come and leave their bits and bobs in the comment section. So I always like making sure that people understand like where it's going for that reason, because we know how social media and online platforms are. So then the last one is voluntariness, which is just like at any point they can walk away and say, I don't want to be a part of this. This is not for me. Please take this down. I especially respect this. I think it's even harder in big media to respect this, because it's like, how can we just take down the story now? But obviously they have to for legal reasons, but there's a little bit more pushback. But of course, like at any point, I always let people know, like, if you change your mind, just let me know. I want to take down this video as soon as possible for you, or whatever the medium is that I chose to share that story. So those are kind of like the 4 main ones. I think that just kind of like leads, like those 4 things just to have in your pocket when you're talking to people from vulnerable backgrounds, and really want to make sure that the consent part is there. Another like little thing that I always do just to protect myself as well is to include consent in like on the camera recording, like start recording the video and then ask and be like, hey, would like to ask for consent, and I'd like it to be a part of the video, just so that I have that reassurance as well. So I'll communicate that I'm recording, but also communicating that I'm protecting myself too. I think it's important for them to know that, things happen, right? And people, sometimes you can't really prepare for everything. And you do have to know for yourself, like, no, I did ask for this. I have proof of this, just in case. We all know how things can get turned against us very easily in vulnerable situations. I see the chat happening. Yes, I've seen that. Okay, see you, Stella. This is old. Bye, Stella. She's already gone. Amelia, how do you help people understand their risks, like the person for dress day? Yes, okay. That's a really good question. So let me give a more recent example. So I did an interview with Life Manson, who is at the Palestine protest rally. Like, what was this back in no, this is not September, this was October. And it took off. It was definitely my most viral video on planet Earth. It has like a bajillion views, like more than I can even understand or imagine, because people downloaded it or screen recorded it and reposted it everywhere. Like, some people were messaging me like, oh, this influencer I know was like reposted it, but it wasn't even like my video that I shared. It was like another account that reshared it. So it probably has, across all the internet, like more than 50 million people have seen that one little interview from Prince George, which is crazy. But how do you even go about like knowing that that's going to happen? So one thing that I talked about with Life is I did the same thing I always do. I tell, hey, this is who I am. This is where this is going. And one additional thing that I do is I always ask questions that aren't specific. I always ask open-ended questions. I think that this helps that in a sense, because I never want it to be like, how do I put this? sometimes in situations when our emotions are running high and we really want to share something and we want to talk to the media and we want to let something out. And I know I've been there. We sometimes just say what's on our heart in the moment, even if looking back, we're like, okay, I was a little too honest with the world. So I always enjoy asking open-minded questions because it gives them the opportunity to think about, okay, what is it about this that I want to share now that the camera's recording? And so when I interviewed Life, I just asked him to tell me why he was at the rally. Like that was it. That was the only question I asked. I said, tell me why you're here today. And sounds good. Thank you, Misha. Take care. And it just kind of gave him like one open-ended question, and then he kind of went with it and he shared what was on his mind. I think sometimes when we ask those close-ended questions, it makes them think about where they have to go with the conversation. So once they understand the risks, they know what's going on, then the questions is kind of like the second half of an interview, or where you're guiding the conversation. I find with things that I know are more controversial, I'm not here to ask every little thing and challenge you on every little thing. I just want to know, why are you here? And then it ended up producing the best story I've ever worked on in terms of virality. So, and afterwards, after it went viral, I did again talk to Life, because since Sakani's thing went viral, I was like, okay, I need to start. Like, I never actually had her contact information afterwards, but I knew I did have her consent. So that's something I've improved on and changed since Life's, is I did take his contact information. So sometimes I'll ask people like, do you follow me? Do you know, have we connected before? Just in case I want to follow up with them and I want to ask questions. So when Life's viral video went, I did reach out to him and I said, hey, like, this is going viral. Like, how are you feeling about this? Do we want to take this down? And we had a conversation and he said he was very comfortable with it being online. So I guess, I don't know if that kind of answers your question a little bit, but like the actual questions, like from the consent, making sure all those 4 kind of steps are there, the questions that I'm asking, and then making sure I have their kind of contact information to follow up on things. Taria, you had your hand up. Is there something you want to ask or add?
Yeah, I can't remember the point of it at this point, my darn ADHD.
I'm so sorry.
But, no, it's okay. It was on the kind of on the topic of the repercussions of sometimes what happens in the media. There was a story here 2 years ago where it was very poorly written by our local newspaper, and it was myself and 5 other activists at a town hall meeting, and it was the city council allowed it to get very inappropriate, judgmental. They were stigmatizing the people we were there to defend. So there was like 40 community members and then us 6 activists. And we got really emotional. And one of my friends stood up and was like, because we were done, we had tears in our eyes. And when we had our opportunity to speak, all these haters rolled their eyes, scoffed at us, and mumbled under their breath and called us names. But we sat with our head held high for over an hour. And then finally, my friend stood up and was like, we're done. We're all crying, like holding back tears. And he stood up and said, the opposite of addiction is love and connection. And we walked out. That's it. And they called the cops and, oh, turn off the cameras. And it was this big bullshit. And then at the end of it, which was still aired online through the City of Terrace website, a man stood up and said that the homeless people are like a bad bear problem. Rather shoot them or relocate them. So the story was about us and how they had to call the cops on us because we were outrageous, and the freaking reporter wasn't even at the city hall. So he took, from city council's perspective, which wasn't truth at all, called the cops. We stood outside council, our chamber windows, and drummed. Cops came and we were peacefully drumming and singing our songs. And then I get home and I finished watching the rest of the council meeting, and that's when that man said that. The article they came out with was horrible. It like villainized us. And then I started getting messages on social media, because I'm like the only Taria. And people were threatening. Like, fuck you, you're supporting those people, you're the problem in this community. And it made me look like a criminal, which then jeopardizes my job, my children, because I'm a single parent, like all of these things I have to live in. So I contacted the reporter and he's like, actually, I know for a fact you weren't there because I was. I explained to him what happened and I said, in the future, maybe contact us for the truth because we're better at it than politicians. And also, here, watch this video clip. I had a young employee of mine show me how to screen record or something. And I sent him the clip of that man saying what he said. And I was like, you're villainizing us, but city council, when that man said what he said, we don't disagree with you, sir. Meanwhile, we walked out with someone saying the opposite of addiction is love and connection, and they made us look like criminals. It was awful. And I had messages for weeks and weeks and weeks. Just threatening me, or, there was probably 40% positive saying thank you for fighting for the vulnerable people, and 60% of these privileged people threatening. And so the impacts of those things can be, it's what made me very skeptical to use social media and stuff. And I am very much a beginner, but I've started to use the TikTok just to inform my community on what's really happening on our streets here, because it's not covered. And thankfully I've had no threats yet and a lot more positive feedback, but it's still very confusing. I'm very afraid for that stuff to start happening again, because then it made me worry about my kids and everything too. And the reporter did go back and edit his article, but it was too late. So many people had already read it. I'm not sure what my point was, but that was my story.
No, that brings to mind like so many different thoughts. Oh my goodness. Thank you for sharing that, first of all. I did a piece, it wasn't even like journalistic, it was kind of a mix of journalism / production last year for Black History Month. And it was just like interviewing Black women, and we just asked them to be honest and candid about their experiences, and then we posted the clips online. And for some reason they just landed on the wrong side of the algorithm, and we kept getting a lot of comments of people being like, oh, like you're just playing the victim, like racism isn't even real, just nasty stuff like that. And we ended up having to take down some of the videos because it was just so dehumanizing stuff. And of course I want to respect people who participated, but why I bring that up is because there is a lot of people that do think that, like more than I even can understand or imagine. And similarly with your story, Taria, the reality is that there's so many people that truly believe what that command said, that like fully support, obviously, as you know. And sometimes as journalists, that can also guide our stories, the people that we surround ourselves with, the energy that we know. Like it's almost like sometimes there is no other side. Like maybe, and I'm assuming that perhaps this journalist was in that. It was like he wasn't there that day. He wasn't on the ground actually doing the story, so he couldn't actually see what was happening. He's reporting from after the fact and what the community or people are saying, and maybe people around him are saying, because I know that's how I know that's how newsrooms are sometimes. So that shouldn't happen. And that's a really big, there's two sides to this. A, we have a big loss in our community the more that local papers dwindle, because oftentimes like bigger media will leech off of like some small stories that come out and then follow up on them and make it into a big interview. But also independent journalism just isn't in the North. Like, I mean, there's Rebel News. People always tell me there's Rebel News. Rebel News is Rebel News. I'm not Rebel News. There's a big difference. But having people that are there, again, that going back to the stories are not told between 10 a.m. and 3 p.m. or whenever you can come out, or if you can even come out. It's when you're there and you're present and you're witnessing and you're observing and you're doing all that, those story, how to find story things right there present. So I'm standing with you in that frustration in storytelling, in journalism, that like the key thing is that person, the journalist who wrote that story, wasn't there. He was listening to accounts or city council's opinion, which we know sometimes is very, very far from reality. And then using that as a guide and a push to tell that story. And that is something that, God willing, is changing. And I stand with you in changing that, and ensuring that things like that don't happen, or happen as often, at least, to the very least. Anyway, thank you for sharing that. Inspired some thoughts in me as well. Okay, so I'm just gonna jump back here. So after these kind of 4 points, like I was mentioning, I guess with Amelia, was preparing the questions. Like sometimes one thing that I really disagree with in big media is that they don't actually tell people the questions they're asking beforehand. It's actually industry standard. And that is so wild to me, that you're not allowed to tell people the questions you want to ask them beforehand. You're allowed to say generally maybe a topic or two that you want to bring up, but you're not supposed to. And I think that, especially in vulnerable situations, this is one of the most harmful practices that I've personally witnessed, and I do not believe in when dealing with more sensitive topics, maybe a little bit controversial to my peers, but especially when people are already at risk in a situation, it's so important and crucial for them to understand what your questions are, because your questions lead the story. They make the story up. And so if they can discern from your questions your thought process, your angles, how you are already interpreting the story, then, well, it'll either make or break the conversation, right? Somebody will be like, I don't like your questions. I don't think you understand what's even going on here. No, I decline to do this interview. Or your questions will actually be good because you did your research, you took the time to understand the story before going to the source. And they might say, yes, you know what? I love your questions. Let me share some things with you. So questions are such an important part of everything. And I think it's a big part of consent. Amelia said, that's a great tip too. Big media is coming to the encampment. We can ask the journalists to share the questions before. Yes. And they might refuse. They might say no. But they're also really want to tell the story. So if you kind of pry a little bit and you're like, no, these people need the questions beforehand just to make sure that they feel comfortable answering them. Like just keep pressing a little bit. And oftentimes they'll probably end up saying, okay, sure, here's what we're kind of thinking of asking. But questions give you the intention overall. And then obviously communicating the consent, respecting that consent at all given times. Again, like being able to withdraw it or take things down. Adapting to situations. I think this is, again, something I think is harder in big media and easier when it's something smaller. It's just being able to sometimes even give anonymity. Just saying like, hey, like I want you to be a part of the story, but I want you to remain anonymous because I understand the risk and the harm that this could bring to you. That is another thing that is so hard to achieve in big media. It is so hard to grant anonymity. In all the times of sharing my stories, there's only one story that I did that somebody got that, which was when we did a story on sextortion. And it was someone from the PG community who was open to sharing their story and how they got sextorted. And they were like a young male, because that's kind of a little epidemic going on, is young men getting sextorted, or teenage adolescent men. And that was the only time. But there was a time when I was working on a story when the Iranian war kind of broke out, and people wanted to talk to me. Like I knew people from the Iranian community that wanted to speak out and wanted to do something. And CBC refused to do the story if they were going to remain anonymous. And they were literally telling me like, Nadia, if we like speak out, our families are going to know, like there's a risk that our families or the government's going to find out what we said here in Canada. And that was a refusal, which the other flip side of that is because it's because we want to make sure that the stories we're telling have voices. And we can see those voices and we know that it's not just somebody saying something that isn't real. Like and I can understand that, but again, vulnerable populations need so much more care, so much more attention, and it's not like every other story. So yes, and of course, learning from your feedback, just a guided from Sekani's story to life story, like thinking about how I could have done that better, what I wish I had, which was her contact information, made sure I had that the second time it happened. So those are kind of like the best tips and tricks for consent. Again, there's some more resources down here as well. So I'm going to attach to the email 2 actual like article studies that were done. And one of them is called The Use and Abuse of Media in Vulnerable Societies. And it's a really great read. And then the second one, which is just crazy good, that it's just something that's free on the internet, was called On the Record, Is It Really Informed Consent Without Discussion of Consequences? So that goes right in hand with what you're kind of talking about, Amelia. So I'm going to attach those 2 kind of PDF case study documents as well to the email that I put all these resources in. And then just a quick note, CBC does use the JSP, which is the Journalistic Standards and Practices. So if you're curious and kind of how they guide things, I have included that link. Another great resource that's very similar is the SPJ, the Society of Professional Journalists. And then just respecting privacy as a journalist, this has a link. It's not as official or as structured, but it's a really interesting read. And it kind of goes a little bit more through some legal things as well. But I'm not going to speak to the validity of the article as much because the format, I don't know, it's just mediahelpingmedia.org. And I would say like maybe the format of the article makes me a little bit skeptical, like the complete validity of it. And obviously I don't think it's not based here in Canada. I think it's a US site, so some of the things that they could talk about from a legal standpoint are different because of the different jurisdiction, different country. So just be a little cautious if that's a link you end up exploring. And then yes, these are 2 video resources as well. And maybe we'll watch one video at the end really quick, which is probably this one. Vulnerable populations video just talks about what identifies a vulnerable population and how we can define that kind of word. And as well as this one, which I might share after if people want to stay for a little bit longer than the 5:30 mark, because I know it's 5:32 right now. But it's a really great watch. So maybe we'll just watch that. Anyone who needs to leave can leave, as people have been doing. So the last thing I really want to run through is best practices, just some quick tips to actually making content. Just for those who are interested, is I find that the CapCut app is the best quick iPhone editing app. I know people don't stop talking about it, but it's CapCut. And it's a free app. There's a pro version, but you don't need it. There's enough of the free things on it to use it. You can add captions, so like talking captions as people are talking, to make the video accessible for people who might have challenges hearing, or people who just scroll without the audio in general. It's just a really great editor to just put in a couple clips from your camera roll. And yes, it's a great little laugh, from your camera roll, and then you can have all the clips, and then you can drag them and cut them down to the size. So it's a very handy free app. I would say, like, don't be afraid to film on your phone. Most times I'll only use my camera to take nice photos or just for like main videos, but sometimes day to day when I'm out, I like using my phone. It's so much smaller, so much more versatile. It's also less intimidating. Like when you have a whole camera and a whole setup, it kind of makes people feel like, okay, so the whole thing. When it's just your phone and I'll just have it recording and I'll just say, don't even look at the phone, talk to me, and I'll just have it recording. That is the best strategy I've ever had when it comes to sharing real stories for people. It's just like people want to have a conversation. They don't want it to feel like they're behind a whole thing and a whole setup. I find that works best for my style of storytelling. So I'll just have my phone recording and I'll make sure that they can obviously still see the person in frame, but then I'll just be like, let's talk and have a conversation and actually make eye contact as I'm sharing that story or listening to them. So don't be afraid to use your phone. Most of the social media content that is out there is filmed on phone. So it's great. People want it more relatable, and as soon as people see something that's a little more produced, sometimes it shuts people off. So don't be afraid to use your phone at all. A couple actual things that I use. Two things that I think could be handy if it's something you really do. I have this iPhone tripod from Amazon, and it just has a little thing. Put my iPhone there. This is really great. This is it's super light. That was makes this little guy so awesome. He's super light. I've included the link there. If you're interested, this guy. And then also, if you're a little more enthusiastic, want to invest, mics. So I use the Rode wireless little mics, and you might have seen these in videos before, but these are super great. And you can connect them to your phone. You can connect the main receiver to your phone, so you can just have better iPhone audio with your video. So those are really the two things. You could use a gimbal, but like a DJI gimbal thing that you can attach your phone to, but that's like, I think the iPhone one's maybe $150, but this little tripod thing I think is maybe $40, $60. Let me open this link and I can tell you right now. It's $50 right now. But there's even things that are even cheaper. But some kind of tripod for your phone is great. Yeah, though that's my little best practices. Last thing is this one video, and then I'll yield the floor for any questions, but
I grew up in food business. My grandfather was in Iran, more than 40 years in the sandwich business. Cold cuts or warm.
Sorry, 1 second. There we go. Why is this one 24 minutes? I don't remember. I'm not gonna watch it. I'm not gonna watch this. I forgot that this one is like 24 minutes long. No. This is really good. I love this video. I think what's the harm of a little journalism? Like, even the title is just kind of, yeah, this is good. It's 24 minutes. So if you want to watch it, I would say this is probably my top one on that list to watch. Sorry guys. All the rest of the videos were like 7 minutes, and I forgot that guy was the anomaly in the list. Okay, so thank you, Shauna. I appreciate you being here. If you need to run, please run. I will share that for you. Okay, sounds good. Take care. Yeah, so I'm going to share the resources. What I will be sharing for those left, the group has dwindled, is I'm going to share those 2 case studies that I spoke about that are like actual like research kind of based, as well as that little notes thing that I've been going through, and as well as some notes that I've kind of condensed from those 2 case studies as well. So if you're kind of like wondering what the case studies talked about but don't want to read through the whole thing, I'm also attaching notes to that as well. So lots of resources. I'll break down all those resources again in my little email. But yeah, if there's any questions from Amelia, Taria, or Fiona, hit me.